right, so this is the 2025 One Book, One New Orleans Kickoff. First order of business is a huge thank you to Octavia Books and Tom Lowenberg for hosting us tonight. All the people who are listening, running around, setting up chairs, making sure everything is great. Thank you so much for your work and for your hospitality this evening, Tom.
Speaking of chairs, there are 3 of them up here, and I can bring some more out in a second, so please seat it. And there's 3 more back here, there's 4 or 5. I think there's chairs for everybody at the moment. If not, I'll bring more out.
It's like church, the ones in the front row stay conspicuously absent. I also want to thank our board members who are here tonight, Shelby, Liz, Latoya, thank you so much. Without their work, this org does not exist. When I give the opening remarks, I will be honest, I rarely talk about our values as an organization because I am that person who thinks if you're living those values daily, you don't really need to talk about them that much. But in light of recent events, and especially with the announcement today about the funding freeze for many things, including some nonprofit organizations, I just want to start out by saying 3 quick things. Number 1, here at One Book, One New Orleans, we believe that our diversity as a community is our strength. Number 2, all are welcome here to show up as your authentic self, whatever that may be. You are always welcome. And number 3, we will never turn our backs on the most vulnerable among us in our community.
Yes, yes.
And we hope to live those values every day in the work we do. What is that work, you ask? So glad you asked. We pick 1 book every year, and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we're going to grow stronger as a community through a shared reading experience. But when we do that, we have to recognize that approximately 27% of New Orleanians over the age of 18 struggle with literacy every single day. So if we're going to be 1 book, 1 New Orleans, we have to figure out a way to reach that 27%. So we develop a curriculum around our annual selection, and we give that book and the curriculum free of charge to adult ed programs throughout the city. It's being used currently in 7 different adult education programs to teach adults to read. We also get the book into the ears of the blind and print handicapped through a partnership with WRBH Reading Radio. They will record the book and they will broadcast it cover to cover. We get the book into jails and prisons through a partnership with Louisiana Books to Prisoners. And for the past 2 years, and I'm happy to say that as of today, we were just cleared for another 2. We've actually been able to bring the author into the jail to do a book talk and signing with the people being held there. We get the book into each branch of the New Orleans Public Library so that if you can't afford to buy the book at a beautiful independent bookstore such as this one, it's available near you for free. And we'll also sometimes just drive around and put them in the little free libraries to make sure something's even closer to you and available for free. And then after we've done all of this work making the book accessible, we have a series of free family-friendly events in different neighborhoods every year. We don't repeat the same neighborhood twice in a calendar year, so this is the Uptown event this year. Thank you all for being here. And we bring everyone together through discussions and readings and workshops and really try to create the community around the shared reading experience. And as all of you know, if you're here tonight, the 2025 One Book, One New Orleans selection is Daughters of the New Year by E.M. Tran. So what's going to happen tonight is E.M.'s going to read a little bit, and then she will be interviewed by Annell López. I'm not going to get back up here, so I'm going to read their bios and then get out the way. And I'm going to start with Annell. Annell López is the winner of the Louise Merriweather First Book Prize and the author of the short story collection, I'll Give You a Reason. A Peter Taylor Fellow, her work has appeared in Guernica, American Short Fiction, Michigan Quarterly Review, The Common, Brooklyn Rail, Refinery 29, and elsewhere. López received her MFA from the University of New Orleans. She is working on a novel, and I can't wait to read it. And the lady of the hour, E.M. Tran, is the author of the debut novel, Daughters of the New Year. Her stories, essays, and reviews can be found in such places as the Georgia Review, Literary Hub, Joyland Magazine, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Prairie Schooner, and Harvard Review Online. She completed an MFA at the University of Mississippi and a PhD in creative writing at Ohio University. She was born, raised, and currently lives in New Orleans, Louisiana, and we are so happy to have her with us tonight. Thank you. Everyone. Oh, good Lord. Thanks for coming. I'm so honored to be the pick for 2025 One Book, One New Orleans. Honestly, it's my dream to be viewed as a New Orleanian writer and to have my book considered a New Orleanian book, a book about Vietnamese people. In across the city we have Vietnamese communities, so it's really, really special to have these communities that I grew up with, that raised me to be considered a part of New Orleans. So thank you. And tonight I have my husband and son here, my son who is hopefully gonna sit through the whole event. We're on the edge. I'm just gonna read a very short paragraph because I prefer to have the conversation with Annell because she's really interesting and cool. So this is my book is from the different perspectives of many different female characters, and this one is in the middle of the book from Swan, the mother figure, and she is at the grocery store. At the American grocery store, Swan learned exactly what she needed. She never lingered or browsed the aisles. She never double-checked. She knew. She knew what she needed, and she knew what they would have to offer her. They had lettuce and carrots and cucumbers, vinegar and eggs and garlic. There were even items Swan had discovered and now added to her list. Braunschweiger liver sausage, which was almost exactly like pate, bagels from the bakery, 2 liters of Coca-Cola. Sometimes they had ginger root, but most of the time they didn't. They had white rice, but it was never jasmine. They had fish in the meat department, but never whole. Instead, clean, portioned flesh shimmered, wet and bright in the case. No head, no bones, no tail. So I actually picked that passage because I went to the grocery store yesterday to buy fish. And I couldn't get catfish that was cut in a steak. And they only sell it in fillets for some reason. And I had to go to a Hong Kong supermarket on the West Bank. And after we put our child to bed and I went at like 8 p.m. I showed up and I was like, can you please cut this catfish for me? And the guy was like, I can only do the whole catfish. So I bought an entire catfish's worth of steaks last night at 8 p.m. Anyway, I feel Swan's pain there.
Yeah, I would feel that. I feel that pain too.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm so happy that you're all here and that we're here to celebrate what I was just telling, not calling
Please don't call me Liam.
what I was just telling Lizzie, that feels, historic and special, that this book has been chosen as a One Book, One New Orleans selection, a book that is very New Orleans, but also very much about the Vietnamese diaspora, and one of its kind in terms of One Book, One New Orleans selections ever. So that's great, and congratulations for that.
Thank you.
The next thing I was gonna say, I see your husband and William are on their way out. That's okay. I was gonna say, surprise, it's not me who's leading the conversation, it is the child.
It's my
but
son.
the child's on his way out.
He said bye.
Thank you for reading that passage for us. I want to start with, what inspired, Daughters of the New Year, and how did your own experiences shape the narrative? And I'm interested in sort of hearing, the origin story of the book from the beginning till now in our hands.
Yeah, okay. Well, I feel like it started when I was in graduate school and I was in my PhD program. And
I had to read you have to do this thing called your comps, and so you compile this list of books, and it's, like 200 books long or whatever, and you have to like have a broad view of American literature, or whatever it is that you're studying. And I really wanted to study more Asian American authors. So I was putting all these Asian American authors on my list, and I was reading about them, and I was doing a bunch of different research about Vietnamese history, and I was actually shocked. I had this like moment where I was like, I don't know anything about Vietnamese history. Like, I never learned it in school. My parents don't talk about it. No one ever talks about it. I think maybe the Vietnam War had like a paragraph in 11th grade AP history when I was like 16, and it was like, and that was a bad time. Next chapter. Like, so I realized I didn't know anything about it, and my parents never talked to me about it because I think it's a very traumatic experience for them. So when I was doing all this research as like an adult, I was like, wow, I don't know any of this. And one thing led to another, and I learned about these woman warriors who were prehistory basically, but they were these women that led these resistance efforts against invading Chinese forces, and they've become these mythological figures in Vietnamese history because there's not that much written history about them, right. And then they become these kind of ideological figures for whatever political movement is happening at the time, and it's a very tumultuous history in Vietnam generally, so I feel like ripe to pick these kind of vague figures and like use them to your political ends. So I was really interested in these women warriors, and I was like, I want to write about them, and I want to write about being from New Orleans and being Vietnamese, and somehow all of those things came together in a strange way because what I realized was that talking about the origin in quotes, because like time continues to go backwards forever, but like the origin story of my family was also intertwined deeply with like the origin stories or my understanding of Vietnamese history and the war and colonial histories and all kinds of things. So that was kind of the start of it. But I mean, the larger answer to that question is that like in school I never read books about Asian people. Yeah. Like literally there was one book and it was Joy Luck Club. And I think I read that. Yeah, it's literally one book. It's Amy Tan, Joy Luck Club, and I read it. Actually, I even read that in college. I read that in like a world literature class or something, which is hilarious because she's Asian American. But so I think that part of my project as a writer is just kind of pushing against that and writing my experiences and like representing something that I never got to see as a kid.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, sort of to come at this from the perspective of someone who didn't get to see it, Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Amy Tan because, I didn't grow up in New Orleans, I grew up in New Jersey, and, reading literature in high school, Amy Tan was sort of different from everything else. So it was like my entryway to literature that wasn't just all the same. That sort of explored, diasporas and immigration or those stories that I didn't get to see in other books. So I can see the need for that representation and sort of how that might be driving, the desire to write these stories. This is a really beautiful and very sort of vast novel. There's history and there's you're very welcome. There's multiple perspectives. We're moving through time and also through places, right? So we're in New Orleans, we're in Vietnam. Like there's a lot here. And I was going to go in order of my questions, but I'm going to jump around based on something that you said just now. You said that time continues to move backwards. And if anyone here has read the novel, it is structured in a really unique way where time sort of, moves backwards. And I think that is, and we'll talk more about structure and how that is just really ambitious as a writer, just to write that kind of story, especially when we're trained to look at events and things in very linear, continuous ways where time moves forward. Talk to me about time moving backwards. You said it just now, and I had to stop to write it down because it was, I know it's present in the novel, but hearing you say it so casually felt very meaningful. And just to quote you again, time continues to move backwards forever. That's what you just said.
I'm
Say
glad
more.
that you find meaning in my word vomit. I appreciate that.
If that is word vomit, that is gold.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, most of the things that I do are done in, I think maybe I have like an oppositional issue, like where people are like, you should do it this way. And I'm like, well, no, like,
You should do it the other way.
yeah, leave me alone. Like, I want to do it this way.
Was this when you were in school like this ever?
Was I in school like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, mostly as an adult, though. As a child, I was very
Okay.
docile.
Which was for teacher.
Yeah, no, I was a star student as a child. It's when I became an adult that people were like, "What's wrong with you?" But it was actually in my MFA. I went to Mississippi, and it's a very, I mean, I loved going there. I had a great experience there, but I felt like the writing program there was full of writers who were very plot driven. They were very I would like, you know, like Tommy Franklin is a crime writer, like, and that's very much invested in a particular kind of tropes that appear again and again in crime writing, and a particular structure. And sure, you can play with that, but I also felt like his teaching methods, or like in general, like Chris Offutt, he was a crime writer too. Like a lot of their teaching methods came into direct opposition to what I was trying to do. And I love them, and you know, if they were here now, they'd probably yell at me and be like, "No, we weren't." They're cranky old men, but yeah, like they, you know, like I feel like I was often in an argument with Chris Offutt in his workshop where he was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "I don't want to do that." And he's like, "Well, the story sucks," and you know, like, so we were in this. I feel like we were in this constant like battle with each other about how I was allowed to structure stories, and and it's not that he wouldn't let me structure them in a particular way. It's that he didn't understand why I was doing things. Like, he was like, "Why are you doing this? Like, why wouldn't you just tell it the other way?" And it because I also, at the same time, wasn't writing it very well, because I was figuring things out. But a lot of the stories I was writing they weren't linear. They were very, like, temporarily chaotic. It was very like associative. Things were happening at the same time, or not at all, or backwards, or you know what I mean. There were flashbacks. Like, there was just a lot of things happening temporally, and I was resisting that a lot when I was a young writer. But as I got older, I realized, like, maybe this is just the way that the stories that I'm trying to tell need to be told because of the nature of them. Like, you know, the nature of displacement, being removed from your homeland is just naturally going to be very fragmented. It's going to be a lot of history is going to be lost. Everything's going to be based on memory, and memory is very unreliable. So when you're writing about memory, sometimes you can't write about it in a linear fashion. So that's kind of the issue that I came up with when I was writing this book, because the scope of time is so vast. I mean, I think it starts in 2016 and it goes back to like 248 AD or something like that. But like, it's like really, I mean, like the time span's really huge, and there's so much like cultural history, just like geographic history. There's so much, there's so many characters. And so what I realized, you know, what many people are taught when you're writing is that when you're writing a story, you have a character and they move forward in time, and they do something, and then it causes something else. There's some kind of inciting action, and then it causes a consequence, and then that causes something, and then your character continues to react to these things that they have to resolve some way at the end of the book or the story. And when I was writing the book, what I realized was that I wasn't necessarily interested in what the characters were doing as they went into the future. I was interested in uncovering a past that they weren't aware of or didn't know, and understand, and for the reader to understand, like, okay, the characters in the present were affected by these things that I have the privilege of seeing, but they have no idea. Because like, that's how we live our lives, right? Like, like we are the products of our parents' issues, their parents' issues, so on and so forth. But we don't, I mean, most people in this room probably couldn't name their great-great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Right, yeah.
But we're the product of that. So I was really interested in doing the backwards timeline in order to explore that type of interrelationship between characters.
And I love that because I think that you explore, definitely from like a familial, perspective, what is happening or what has happened in the past for these characters, but also from a historical perspective. We are a product of history, and what we're doing in our present is also, it's the sum of all the parts that happened in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that the novel does that really well. Of bringing us into this present where it's like we understand, it's like a character study for a lot of these characters, that we kind of understand who they are based on what has happened and where they come from before them. It takes a lot of courage to write against convention,
Thank you.
So
People were not happy. Why are you doing this?
do you
I
still
don't
feel do you feel, or did you feel like you had to constantly, remind yourself that I know what I'm doing, this is the direction that I'm taking, or at some point did it just become easy to, ignore those voices of convention and sort of that feedback?
I think what happened was that I got older and I stopped
Thank
caring.
God for that, right?
I know, like,
So underrated.
seriously,
Like,
seriously, when I think about
so underrated.
what kind of writer I was when I was 21 at the University of Mississippi Writing Workshop, and I think about like what kind of person I was at that moment in time, and I didn't know what kind of writing I was doing. I didn't even know, like, I don't even think I really knew what kind of reader I was, right? Like, I didn't know how I was reading things. It just, to me, I cared, thinking about that in hindsight, I cared so much about what people thought. And I cared so much about what Tommy and Chris thought. I cared so much about what my professors thought.
Right.
And I think that that's helpful up to a point where, having mentorship and having other voices in the room. I think you have that in any field, right? Like when you're young, you have people who are above you or who have done something longer than you, who help you or give you advice. But I think also at a certain point, it muddies what your own voice is supposed to be. And so I think what happened was that I got to Appalachian, Ohio, where I was like, where the hell am I right now? And it was like isolated. It was like literally the opposite of what I thought Ohio was going to be. I was like, I thought that this was like Cleveland. It was not like Cleveland. It was like literally in the mountains and isolated. And it was also a weird hippie town with like all these people who defected from the Vietnam War. It was such a strange place. But I think I got there and I was like, I feel displaced. I feel like this is the farthest away from home I've ever been. Like, at least, northern Mississippi was, it was very different.
South.
It was very different from New Orleans, but it was still, there were very familiar things about it. It was only 6 hours away from home. I got to Ohio, I was like, I don't know where I am. I don't know who these people are. Why is everyone so weird? Like, and I think I just, being isolated from the things that were familiar made me confront what kind of writer I was and what I wanted to write. And it also, the isolation was also very freeing because I didn't know anyone. So I was like, who cares? Like, I'm just going to write this thing and it's going to be fine. No one's going to die. And we'll just see where, if it sucks, then that's okay too. And it was a very liberating thing, being in a place where you don't really know anyone and it snows and you're like, ugh, what is this?
We all just,
I know.
now we know.
Well, it was great for like one day, right? And then
Right,
like,
it was great for just exactly.
and then 2 days later, you're like, why is the interstate still closed?
It's the worst vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can sort of see that. The idea of displacement, and not just in the physical sense in terms of where you are in a place, but also sort of like displacement as a distance between, like a generational distance or a generational gap, is something that is very evident in the book, right? So we have Zuen, who is a mother, has clearly her cultural beliefs, and then you have the gap that occurs when you have, an immigrant parent in a first generation or a second generation or an American kid.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to write about that?
Well, I feel like it was actually very difficult to write from in the present part of the book, like in the first half of the book, we have the mom and the 3 daughters, and that I found actually more difficult than when you get to the second half of the book, when it goes farther back in time and you meet these great grandmothers and ancestors. And I found it a lot more freeing to write in the past, like far past, because I felt like I was truly making up the characters in a way that I was not necessarily doing in the front half of the book.
Yeah.
And while those characters are fictional, they are heavily based in my own experiences, like, you know, my life growing up as a young girl in New Orleans with immigrant parents. And so that was quite difficult, actually, because I was forced to write empathetically from the perspective of basically my mother, who all children love to say, like, you don't understand, but like, but like, you know, it's like my mom made all kinds of choices that as a kid I was annoyed about. I mean, that I'm still annoyed about to this day. Like, that she still does annoying things, of course, because she's my mom. Like, I feel like every time I'm with her, I revert into a 12-year-old.
No one
like,
tells.
leave me alone.
No one tells.
But oh, she knows, and if she were here, she'd be like, yeah, you don't appreciate me enough. She would literally direct me. But you're right, Mom. I don't appreciate you enough. You're correct. That's a sign of true love. I admit that I'm wrong. Yeah, but I feel like it was hard for me to write from that perspective because, you know, when you write from your own perspective, everything is centered around you.
Yeah.
Everything is centered around your experience, and to put yourself in a different perspective that you have felt your whole life hasn't understood you or hasn't made choices that you felt were the best choices. It forces you to really be a better person, basically.
Yeah.
Than the person that you are. So that was hard because I had to be like, wow, I'm a bad person.
I mean, I guess you didn't have, you know, the emotional distance from, like you said, the parts of the book that are more historical.
Yeah.
That definitely more research had to go into that versus the experiences that resonate with your own life.
Well, I mean, it's also like the anxiety of representing something that still exists today.
Yeah.
And having people read that and say, you did that wrong. You know, like, or that's not right. That's not my experience. And that's fine. It shouldn't be everyone's experience. But there is still that anxiety, like, oh, okay, like, whether I want to or not, I am representing a group of people.
Yeah.
Because there are so few books that are in the mainstream about this, about this community, about Vietnamese people in America. I mean, there's more now, but I mean, like, growing up, there were none. There was like one or two authors.
Like, looking back to Amy Tan as an Asian author.
Yeah. I mean, there was Monique Trung, who is, I mean, she was writing back then, but a lot of people, you know, not to the same level of recognition that Amy Tan was. I mean, there's Viet Thanh Nguyen now, who won the Pulitzer, who, but still, like, a male writer who's not writing from the same experience, not reflecting the experience that maybe I would want to write about or see in a book.
Right. Or that a lot of, you know, women experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like it was hard, but it was also kind of like cathartic, like to be like, you know, to be writing about your family in heavy quotes.
Yeah, right. It's funny. I feel like I'm having a bit of a deja vu moment, but not really. But I did an event with the writer Yuri Herrera, and we were having a similar conversation where, like, sort of, you know, immigration sort of was somewhat the topic, and I made a joke, or he made a joke about how it felt like therapy. And I'm just like, I feel like we're sort of entering this interesting territory.
Okay, let's back off.
Going in a little deeper. I was just gonna ask you, do you feel like a better daughter?
I do.
Not that you weren't a bad daughter before.
I do. I feel like maybe I was. It's a joke. I do feel like I'm I think it has improved our relationship. I think mostly just because, well, it was funny. On the night that my book came out, my mom came to the book event, and she was like, "Who are all these people here for?" I was like, "It was like for me, Mom." Like, my book came out. She's like, "Really?" Oh, and then people were like, "I know, gotta love her," but like, you know, I wasn't hurt or offended by it at all because our relationship is not one where, I mean, I would like send her writing and be like, hey, I wrote this thing. And she wouldn't ever read it because she's just not that kind of mom. Like, she's like, okay, great, thumbs up, but I'm not going to read this.
My
And
parents
so,
also have not read.
yeah, like, it's fine. Like, I'm not hurt by
Nice.
it. I just know that that's who she is. Like, I'm going to give her something and she's not going to read it. And
Yeah.
that's just not who she is. And that's fine. That our relationship is, you know, we build it in other ways. But when I told her that the event was for my book, she was like, oh, really? And then other people were like, hey, have you, like, we heard that this book is about you. Like, how do you feel about that, Kim? And my mom was like, oh, well, you know, like, you know what they say about what writers write about. They write about the most important things in their life. So my daughter is the most important person in her life.
That's a great thing.
Yeah, and she believes it fully. But she believes it to her core that this is why I wrote the book. But I feel like that it maybe in like a less extreme words, like what she really means is that I never realized that my daughter was paying attention or that she cared about like what I went through or my history, and she wrote a whole book about it. And that's and I think that it improved our relationship in that like she realized that I didn't completely write her off, that I was paying attention, that I was interested in her life before me, basically, you know? Like, I think most kids are like, the whole world is about me. My parents don't exist before me.
Right.
And I think to a certain extent, you know, for a while I was like that. I was like, yeah, like, you're not a person, you're just my mom. And when you write something, you can no longer view your parent that way, right? Like, you can't view them as just your parent, this, like, object that just raised you. You have to view them as, like, a fully fleshed human being who had desires, who had life before you, who had, you know, relationships before you. And so I think it improved our relationship. And she read the book.
Oh, that's
Which
nice.
I was shocked. Shocked by.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Did she like it?
She
You know,
TBD. I don't know.
You know, that's a question. I was like, I don't even know why I asked. Erased from the record. We'll talk about that. Let's talk about the research, sort of the more research-heavy portions of the book. What was that experience like? You know, I am fascinated by anyone who writes historical fiction. I feel like there's so much historical fiction happening, like so many great books. And I was telling a friend the other day, or maybe a month ago, who knows, time is moving backwards. Not even real.
I wish it were actually.
Right? Oh God, yes. I was saying, I was like, I feel like I have, you know, I have FOMO. I have fear of missing out. Like, people are doing these historical fiction novels, and I'm not. And like, what am I not learning? I'm not in the historical New Orleans collection going through files. Like, I'm not having fun. There's a party, and I'm not in there.
You come to the party.
Killing me. What was that like to do all the research?
Well, you know, first off, I don't. I mean, yes, there's history in my book, but when people are like, your book is historical fiction, I'm like, wow, really? Thanks.
That's historical notes.
Thank you. There was research involved, and I will say, actually, the research was very, it was very unsettling, because a lot of the stuff that I was looking up were things that, especially during the Vietnam War, were recorded on camera. And so you can go to YouTube and you can look up things from the Vietnam War. You can look up footage of it. It was like, you know, the news cycle was happening. You can look up newspaper clippings, and it makes it feel, and it's not actually that long ago, so it makes it feel very close in time. It makes it feel like it's right behind you. And so that was actually a kind of a disorienting experience to like just go to YouTube and be like, okay, like Buddhist monk setting himself on fire, like, let's check this out, and to like see, you know, to have it just be there available for me to look at. And it really made me, for me, it collapsed time a little bit, in the same way that maybe my book is hoping to collapse time. Like, looking at doing the research and thinking about how close many of these events are, collapsed time for me, and it made it feel like it was right there. And
because like it really is
right there.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you put it in the context of like linear time. It's not
Yeah.
that long ago, especially like, and also in the context of like everything else that's happening in those decades that are surrounding it, right? Like desegregation, the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, like it's all happening at the same time. And it was also really fun though, because I felt like I was doing something that I had never had the privilege of doing before, which was just like spending time and learning about all these things that no one ever told me about. And at the same time, I was trying to mediate it by understanding like what bias am I receiving when I'm looking at the research, because I'm unfortunately not fluent in Vietnamese, so all the things that I was researching were in English. So there's like this weird mediation that's happening between like the history that I want to learn and like what I'm actually learning, because all of the resources that I was looking at were American resources because they were in English. So that was also a really interesting exercise in historical bias and in just like, you know, like placing myself in history as well.
Yeah, would you say that when you were doing the research and sort of diving into the history, did you already have characters in mind? I guess I'm curious about what, you know, sort of chicken or the egg thing was coming first. Were you sort of doing all the research and then sort of crafting these characters, or were the characters there first, and were you sort of just confirming things, going to the research to sort of check what you knew and what you didn't know?
I think the characters existed first.
Okay.
And the history was just the backdrop to the drama of the characters' lives. And I actually think that I built the characters first because I knew that there was going to be a lot of characters, and so I built them using the Vietnamese zodiac as a way to like structure the book and make it just I mean, you know, if you're going to move a book backwards in time and you're going to have like a million characters, you have to give the reader something to hold on to. So I had to structure it in a way that was familiar. So I had the Vietnamese zodiac to help, and also to help me keep it straight when I was writing these characters.
Right.
But yeah, also it's New Year's Eve night tonight. So Happy New Year, everyone. We're on the eve of the Year of the Snake, which is my named year. So apparently the year that you are, when that year comes, it's supposed to be a challenging year. So I hope that it's not that challenging.
You sort of jumped into something I was going to ask you about, you know, using, I guess, the Lunar New Year and also the zodiac as a structural device, but also as a cultural device. What drew you to it? Did you know that it would sort of play the role that it does in the novel in terms of organizing things? Or was it just, you know, sort of a cultural component that you felt, you know, I guess, that you like? Or
Yeah. I mean, I've always liked horoscopes, but I think that when I was writing the mom character, Swan, I wanted her to be really invested in the zodiac and really believe in it. And part of the psychology of that is that, you know, she's a displaced person, she's an immigrant, and this is something that helps her have some kind of tie back to her homeland and her culture and what she's familiar with. And it was also just really fun for me to write about the zodiac and to structure it that way. I think it's twofold, right? It was like, it's a big part of this character and her life, and it affects the choices that she makes and therefore the choices of her daughters, because she's like trying to control them. And then the other part of that is that it was literally just a writing device for me. Like, I think that sometimes the answer really is that boring. We're like, why did you make it this day? Like, well, on the calendar, Friday seemed like it was a good day for that character to have that drink.
no other obligations.
Yeah, like they're off of work, so they got to go on that day. So like for me, like the zodiac really was, part of it was like, I have so many characters. Wouldn't it be cool if I made all of the characters either a dragon, a tiger, or a goat? And then that will help me space the timeline backwards. And then also it will help me to shape the characters, because there are certain character traits with each zodiac sign. And it wasn't necessarily that I was making every character the exact characteristics of that sign. It was like that the zodiac was so important in that family that
it's like culturally,
that the characters were always pitted against or comparing themselves or straining against these ideas of how they should be.
Right. I think it's like possibly one of my favorite aspects of the novel.
Oh, really?
Because I mean, I thought it was fun, you know. It sort of made me wonder, you know, like what would be my year?
What is your year?
The dragon.
Your year of the dragon?
Yeah.
The most coveted of them all.
Right. You know, and then, you know, reading the novel, I was like, well, you know what, that is me.
Like, yeah, I am super creative and good at everything.
It matches. So, you know, I guess I was smiling.
Like,
It made
yeah,
me smile.
dragon.
Yes. But then I would listen to another description and be like, well, I guess I am that too, you know?
The grunting
I'm every woman. Speaking of, you know, writing such a, you know, a cast of characters, yeah, tell me about that experience. It's, you know, I mean, there are writers in this room, and we know that developing one character alone, so hard. It takes so much work, let alone writing, you know, so many women with, you know, very distinctive personalities and desires and wants, and, you know, not a single character blending into the other. Just thinking organizationally as a writer, that's not a small task. What was that like for you?
It was actually, you know, like, I think maybe like 65,000 words deep, I was like, why? Why did I write so many characters? But that was actually a real concern of mine, is that I didn't want the characters to just like, at the end of the book, I didn't want you to say, like, that could have just been one person.
Mm-hmm.
Which I feel like would be a nightmare if someone was like, these are too many characters, like they could have just been one girl.
I mean, that's like legit MFA feedback.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, you know,
Yeah,
this
kill that
boy and that
person.
other, they could just be one
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah, they could just be one. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was scared about that, and I don't know if I did any. I don't know if I like intentionally that I'm such a good writer that I intentionally was like, yeah, I'm gonna make them all so different. I think I was just so close to the work that I was like hoping for the best and writing these characters and using the Zodiac as a way for me to make them just a little bit different from one another, and making sure they had their own individual desires and the things that they want. But I think for the most part, I was so close to the work that like at the end of it, I was like, I hope that no one says that this sucks. And when it got to an editor finally, she was like, this is great. The characters are so different. And I was
They
like,
are.
whew,
Yeah.
thank God. So I think that is important to say, because I do feel like there is a sizable portion of writing that is just like stabbing in the dark and hoping that
Right.
that the words are well placed and that it's okay, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me because, you know, like I read books, and I was explaining this to a friend of mine where, you know, the more I write, the less I'm able to read as a reader anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always sort of approaching every book as a series of choices, and I'm always like, oh, I wonder why this writer did this, or I understand why this writer made this choice. So reading, you know, this cast of characters, I just kept thinking, it's very smart. This is working really well. This is a great choice. This is why these people are different. So I really enjoyed that. Guess it was, you know, a little instructional too. Tell me a little bit about. We've covered a lot of questions. I'm sorry, y'all. I am. Can you tell I'm a teacher? If you can't tell,
We love teachers.
I
Yes.
have a lesson plan. I've asked you a lot of these already. Yeah, did you receive any specific feedback about this book when you were in the creation process that stood out to you? That you were like, you know what? Yeah, we're going in a different direction, or no, that is wrong. I know I'm going this way.
I think actually, so one of the things that my editor did tell me, well, I received this feedback multiple times and throughout multiple steps of the review process, not just my editor, but my agent, my writing teachers, people who read it in workshop. Like,
Okay.
a lot of people were like, we don't need this one chapter. Like, you should get rid of it. And I was like I told you, I have an oppositional situation where I'm like,
yeah.
what? This chapter's great, first of all. You guys are dumb.
It's gone. Okay.
It's gone. I eventually took the advice, but in the moment I was like, no one here has taste. That's clear to me. No one here knows how to read well, and I am the only person who knows how to write. And it was a chapter about one of the characters going to a bird show to buy a pet bird, which is actually taken directly from my life, which is like, I feel like always kind of a red flag. Like if you're writing directly one-to-one from your life, it's usually the chapter or the story where people are like, maybe I don't really believe this. This sounds like a stupid story. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's probably why I felt so defensive about it, because the story is about a girl who her mom won't buy her a pet. And
this is a wound.
This is a wound. This was like,
this is hurting.
I'm holding on tight to it. Yeah.
What did they deny you?
A bird? A pet cat, actually.
Oh.
And, yes, and I know. Well, I mean, me today would be like, thank God you didn't get that cat, because you would have been terrible at being a cat owner. Mm-hmm. But I wanted a cat, and my mother told me I could have a cat. But I think she just said that to, like, make me get off her back. Like, she was like, yes, fine, you can have a cat. And I was like, great, we're going to go get a cat. And I think we had arranged a day where we would go. I think she thought that I would forget. And I marked it on my calendar, and on the day that she said we could get a cat, I went up to her and I was like, Mom, are you ready to go? We're going to go get that cat. And my mom was like, we're not getting a cat. I was like, what? But you said that we were going to. And I was so upset about this cat. And eventually, I think I probably just wouldn't shut up about it, and eventually as a child, I used to read the classifieds ads. Looking for various animals. I was like, I wanted a pet so badly, I would read the classifieds and be like,
anything.
I was like, look, these guinea pigs are for sale, and they're great, Mom. And she was like, we're not getting a guinea pig. And I would read the classified ads and be like, oh, these Shih Tzus, this breeder is selling Shih Tzus, $800 for a Shih Tzu. And Mom was like, we're definitely not getting an $800 Shih Tzu. So there was, in the classified ads, there was a bird show. And it was at that like round building that's behind Whole Foods on Vets. Well, that used to be Copeland Tower. Have you all been there? The bird show was there. And I went there. And I got I know, this has gone so far away from your question, but I'm getting back to it, I promise. So I actually did end up getting a bird at this show. I was a bird child, I know, I was weird, it's fine. But I had a pet bird. The bird was like the love of my life. My mother also accidentally killed the bird, which is an entirely different story. I know. Well, so I wrote this story about how the girl goes to the bird show, but I changed it so that she doesn't actually get the bird at the bird show. She's not allowed to. The bird attacks her. It's like a whole thing. It's very violent.
They cut it?
They cut it. Thank you, Grace. They said that we didn't need this chapter, and I said,
have no taste.
Are you guys crazy? There's violence. There's drama. There's mother-daughter relationship happening. There's a bird, exotic bird, not just any bird, an exotic one. And they said that it was unnecessary, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Eventually, I was like reading. I had like some distance from it, and then I came back to the book when we were reviewing it one last time, and I was like, maybe this chapter is unnecessary, so we cut it. But then I needed another chapter to go in its place because I don't know. I don't know how these book marketing people work. They're like, you need a certain number of words, and I'm like, okay. So I was like, I'll write another chapter. So I wrote another chapter, and the chapter that came out of it was the one where the cat drowns in the pool, and it was kind of like about. I mean, it's like tangentially mentions this pet wound, as you call it, but it's not.
I feel like we all have that. We all asked for something, and they were like, "No, you're not getting that."
Yeah,
yeah.
You're getting that animal. Yeah, and then all of us become writers, and we write terrible things about how we wish we had a cat.
Yeah.
But one day he'll write about me too. She took me to a book show and made me sit there. But yeah, I ended up writing this chapter, and it ended up being like a much better fit for the narrative of the book, for the kind of overarching timeline of the book, for developing character in the front end as well. The other chapter I'd written was in the back end. So it was just like, it was like a really wonderful learning moment for me in the in the editing process and realizing that your book, like, yes, you are the writer, you are the person who wrote your book, but it's also in many different hands, and you're also responsible to, like, I'm asking a lot of people to read it, right? Like, when you write a book and it's on the shelf and someone buys it, you're asking a lot from someone to, like, take that book off the shelf, to purchase it, to sit down, to dedicate. Your time is so valuable, to dedicate however many hours to reading it. And so it was, like, a really wonderful reminder, like, yes, this is a reflection of who I am as a person, but also, like, maybe the fact that it's this object that passes through many different hands, like, means that I also am responsible to those people that are working with me on writing it. And so in the end, what I ended up producing was what I feel was a better chapter. I ended up cutting the one that I was so attached to. And, you know, also, like, it still shows up a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll write some saccharine personal essay about it for Garden and Gun.
I feel like, yeah, it's gotta come. You have to get it out.
Yeah.
You have to get it out. A writer asked me once, I guess we were talking about writing about immigration, first generation Americans, and what that sort of gap does, and how that can feel like a wound sometimes between mothers and daughters, and those differences, the people that are really the closest to you, but sometimes can feel so distant from you based on either age or culture or things. Is this a theme that you will explore further, or are you good?
This is the end of wounds. No, I definitely.
We actually refer to it as a wound. Yeah.
Who's we?
My friend and I.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, are these professionals? Like,
professional writers.
So yes, professionals.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm maybe a one-trick pony, but I feel like it is, like, the big theme of my life, basically, is, like, being the child of immigrants and having this gap and understanding between me and my parents that can never be bridged. Like, no matter how close we can get to understanding, there will always be that gap. And I think that's true for any parent-child relationship to a certain extent.
Absolutely,
Like, there is always going to be some kind of gap in that. They for so long will never view you as a person, and vice versa, you for so long will always view them as a child. And so there's always going to exist that kind of misunderstanding. But I think in many immigrant families, that is so much exacerbated because there's so much silence in history, in the way that we deliver history to each other. Because my parents quite literally never talked about the Vietnam War. I think maybe my dad told one story, and it was always like, in hindsight, it was like a horrifying story, but he always told it as like a joke, where it was about like landmines or something, and it was always like as an adult, I'm like, wow, that was like a really traumatizing story for him probably.
Yeah.
But also, like, the way that he told it was such, like, let me tell you a good joke, I know. And so I think that was the only way that he could talk about it. And so that is just representative of the gap in understanding, the misunderstanding that we have between us, the way that he couldn't talk about things. And I also never thought to ask, because I was like, why would I ever ask you about this? It never even occurred to me to ask, So I'm definitely writing about it now, and I'll probably write about it in the future. Probably everything I write from here on out will be about that.
Yeah. And I think that that's a legit thing, that it's very universal, whether it's culturally or just, age or historical, right? Like, our parents might have grown up during X, Y, and Z events that were happening. All those things are, gaps and distances. And it's fascinating to read, and equally fascinating to write.
Yeah. Well, you write about that too, so.
I do, yeah. I wanted to ask you, what do you want? I guess I have two more questions. So I think, I could do this all day. I don't know about you guys. But I do want to open up
Can
the
you ask
space
a
for
teensy
people.
bit about the plot too? Just like what the book is like.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
This must be a very interesting
It does feel
conversation.
like going backwards
from the
in time.
outside. You're like, what is this book about? So it's about a Vietnamese American family, about a mom and a father who immigrated from Vietnam, and they have 3 daughters. And it's about their relationship and the kind of, the issues that happen when you have 2 traumatized people coming out of the Vietnam War and their first generation kids. And the narrative moves backwards in time. So you meet the characters as they regress in age, and you kind of learn more about where they come from, and you learn about the kids and why the kids act the way they do and why the parents act the way they do. And as you go farther and farther back in time, you meet ancestors, great-grandmothers, great-grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers, and eventually the book goes into Vietnam. And so you see the Vietnam War, you see French Indochina, and then you also, it goes really far back in basically to the point of the women warriors that I was mentioning earlier. So it's episodic, a little bit fragmented. There is a narrative about the family, but it's kind of lyrical, and you learn a little bit about a lot of people.
Sorry.
Oh, no, thank you for asking that.
Very relevant question.
It's a super relevant question. It's a good way to round out all of that we've talked about in the conversation, so thank you. What do you want readers to take away from this?
I don't want anything from them. I want readers to just maybe by the end of it have their horizons a little bit wider, to just see a little bit of the world that they maybe wouldn't have seen before. And actually, like, being the One Book One New Orleans pick, like, for me, like, actually what I want is in the national imagination, like, the idea of New Orleans to just be a little bit more expansive.
Absolutely. And I love that. And, like I said, it's special, that this is the pick. The dreaded question of what are you working on next? What are you working on next?
Well, it's actually a complicated question because I was working on something and then I burned down on it really bad. Okay. And I literally emailed my agent yesterday and was like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm working on something else. And so anyway, the answer to that is that I'm working on something else, but I don't know what it is yet.
That's fine.
I know what it is, but it's like the seed. I've written like the first 3 paragraphs and I'm like, maybe this is good. So anyway.
I'm sure it is. And that's exciting. But let's what questions do you all have? Yes.
I was wondering what character you related to the most in the book.
That's a great question.
I actually, a lot of people expect me to say that I relate to the youngest daughter the most because I am the youngest. Like, my own family structure reflects the structure of the family in the beginning. I'm one of 3 daughters. I'm the youngest, but I'm not Year of the Dragon, as you know. I'm Year of the Snake, which is the best year. As well. But a lot of people expect me to say that, but I don't. I mean, I do relate to her just because it's an exploration of, like, birthplace, right? Like, what kind of person do you end up being when you're the youngest child or the middle child or the oldest child? In a lot of ways, that's what those characters were doing for me. Like, I wasn't necessarily trying to make the oldest daughter an exact one-to-one replica of my oldest sister. Like, I wasn't trying to do that. But she does have a lot of similarities to her just because my oldest sister was the oldest and a lot was expected of her. But I think that the character, I would say that I relate the most to those 3 daughters, just because, like, all 3 of them, because I think that there are pieces of me that are in all of them. And when I was writing them, I felt like, sure, I was exploring what it would be to be the oldest daughter, but I wasn't writing like, okay, what happened to my oldest sister, Kathy, when she was 12 years old? I wasn't doing that. I was like writing this character and then taking something from my own life and saying, like, okay, this happened to me when I was a kid. What would it be like if this happened to this character in this particular, moment in her life when she is the oldest child? And so I think that there is a piece of me in those, particularly in those 3 characters in the front half of the book, Drew, Yi, and Trek. Like, what are my characters' names? I'm like brain dead right now. But yeah, those 3 sisters, I would say.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I know Lizzie had her son, during the time she was writing the book, and I was just wondering if her perspective changed when she became a mother when you were writing the book.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I'm making choices in a way that I never thought about things before, like food. I mean, Madeline and I were talking about like food earlier and like our issues with food, and I obsess kind of about how much he's eating or like what he's gonna eat or how I'm gonna present the food to him, or if he rejects the food, like what do I do? Will it mess him up forever if I'm like, you have to eat this? And so I think as a parent, there are so many things that you are forced to consider in your day-to-day life that you never have to consider if you're not a parent. And it's really changed the way that I view my mom and my dad too, because I'm sure that they were like, what? I mean, dinner comes every night. It's incredible. Like every night we have to eat dinner.
So much work.
It's so much work. And then when you're feeding someone else, it's so annoying because they're like throwing it on the floor and not eating it. So like, I mean, I don't know. I don't remember what I was like, obviously, as a 16-month-old, but I can guess that I probably was like, I mean, when you're 1 year old, like you're just doing whatever the hell you want, right? So I kind of feel like being a parent has just made me more considerate of other parents in general. Like when you're on an airplane and someone's, their kid is crying. Like, I think before I would have been annoyed, but now I'm like, oh God, that poor person.
Alan, ask a question.
No, I think the book is just a great and important choice for one book, and so I was interested in what are you most looking forward to, or what do you most want to do as the one book author for this year?
Well, I am gonna go visit the jail to do the book club with them, and I'm really looking forward to that. I feel like it's really important that people in prisons have books. And it's really exciting to be able to go in and talk to them about my book and like have them. I mean, I think that they're like Megan was saying that they're the most eager kind of readers, just because they're in prison, they're trapped, and like their way, to me, like that's what makes a book so special, is that it's a gateway or a window or an entryway into a kind of freedom, right? Like you get to go somewhere else, you get to learn something else about someone else. And so I'm really excited to be able to go in and talk to them about the writing process, about the book, about what they thought about it. They might rib me about it, I don't know, like we'll see. But yeah, I'm excited about that.
Thank you.
I think we might have time for one more question.
Is there a community growing amongst like Vietnamese Americans in New Orleans of writers? Because I noticed that there are. I have noticed that like a few more books, and so I was just wondering, is there any like community that's growing now with that?
Yeah, actually I'm a part of a Vietnamese creatives crew. It's like a text message. It's like it's a fancy way for me to say text message, but we're in a WhatsApp together. But yeah, I mean it's really cool to just. I think as a kid I was so isolated from the Vietnamese community. We didn't live in New Orleans East or in Woodlawn, and so I never felt. And also I'm not fluent in Vietnamese, and so I always felt like I was not. I wasn't welcome or I didn't belong in any community, right? I was just kind of solitary. And so it's really special to be a part of this kind of blossoming creative community that is very much Vietnamese and very much interested in our culture and in also specifically how unique it is to New Orleans. But more broadly, actually, there are a lot of Vietnamese American writers, like nationally, that have started publishing. And like I think the month that my book came out in 2022, the month before another Vietnamese writer came out with a book, and then the month after another Vietnamese woman came out with a book. And so it just feels actually a very special moment in like my writing life to be able to, like if I'm writing about something, if I'm writing about the new year, or if I'm writing about the zodiac, or if I'm just just writing, not even about those topics, that I can text one of those people and be like, man, it's so hard writing, isn't it? And for us to just have that community, and it doesn't have to necessarily be about us being Vietnamese, it just is about that feeling of community somehow, and like also seeing a face that looks like mine.
That's meaningful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
I think Megan will conclude.
I will, just do that housekeeping question because you're not the only one who's going to have it. Okay, so the books are in transit. Thank you, Snowmageddon. So basically, Tom ordered a ton of books for this event, and they are somewhere in New Orleans, but not here.
They haven't been unloaded from the truck yet. I guess they're waiting for warehouse space. They might be here tomorrow, hopefully.
Now that being said, if you order a book from Tom tonight and write down how you would like it inscribed, Lizzie has agreed to come back here and inscribe it personally to you after they arrive. So we can still support this beautiful local business.
Yeah, so just see Mark at the desk. He's got a little form to use. We will ring you, if you want it inscribed, we'll ring you up. And we do have also some copies of Annell's book here. So you can still walk away with a signed book tonight.
And I'll tell one story to close it out, just to piggyback on what you just said. So from 2 to 4 today, right before I picked up the egg rolls, I was inside the jail with book club. And one of the readers, it was a book of poetry, had counted every syllable in the author's haikus and was ready to ask them why they broke traditional pattern.
Whoa.
That's the level you're getting. It's amazing what the readers in the jail come up with. It's really cool. And one of the best things I think One Book, One New Orleans has done. So thank you. I look forward to that and every other event. Follow us on Insta. Sign up for our newsletter to see more. Annell, thank you for your beautiful, insightful questions. Y'all, can we give it up for them? And we will see you in February.